I'm Lisa Morgan, 32, and for as long as I can remember, I've inhabited the role of the responsible older sister to Rebecca. Our childhood was a tapestry woven with shared dreams, whispered secrets, and an unspoken pact of eternal togetherness. We were, quite simply, inseparable. The day Rebecca called, her voice trembling with an almost unbearable joy, as she announced her engagement to James. My heart swelled with a happiness that rivaled her own. To be asked to be her maid of honor wasn't just an honor, it was a sacred duty, a reaffirmation of our bond. I threw myself into the planning with an intensity that bordered on obsession, investing thousands of dollars, countless hours, and every ounce of my heart into crafting what I envisioned as her perfect day. But family dynamics, as many of you know, are a labyrinth of unspoken rules and deeply ingrained patterns, particularly when my mother, Deborah, holds the reins of control. Never in my wildest imaginings could I have foreseen the day she would look me directly in the eyes and utter those soul-crushing words that cleaved my world in two. If you're out there, watching this from somewhere in the trenches of your own family drama, I urge you to drop a comment below, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story, my story, just might be the mirror in which you find the strength you need to face your own battles. Growing up as Rebecca's elder sister was not merely a matter of birth order, it was a calling. I instinctively adopted the mantle of her protector and guide, a role I embraced with unwavering dedication. From the painstaking lessons in tying her shoelaces, a task she initially found impossibly complex, to navigating the treacherous social currents of high school drama, I was the unwavering constant in her life, the one she could always, without question, count on. Our mother, Deborah, made no effort to conceal her blatant favoritism. Rebecca, with her innate artistic talents and effervescent, bubbly personality, was consistently cast as the golden child, bathed in the warmth of mom's approval. I, on the other hand, was perpetually labeled the practical one, the sensible foil to Rebecca's free spirit, perpetually urged to lighten up and embrace spontaneity. My father, Thomas, existed largely in the periphery of our intricate family dynamics. His preference for peace over any form of confrontation was absolute, especially when mom's behavior brazenly overstepped personal boundaries. In the vacuum created by his passive approach, I, as the responsible eldest child, became the family's default problem solver. When the roof developed a leak that threatened to flood the living room, it was I who meticulously arranged for the repairs. When the household bills unexpectedly piled up, it was my savings that quietly covered the shortfalls, ensuring our family's financial stability. This deeply ingrained pattern of support and self-sacrifice extended seamlessly into our adult years. When our parents' contributions faltered, it was my financial assistance that saw Rebecca through her art history degree, allowing her to pursue her passions unburdened. My own career path led me to become a financial consultant at a prestigious firm nestled in the heart of Boston's bustling financial district. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue while I expertly managed multi-million-dollar portfolios for high net worth clients. A silent expectation lingered that I would continue to manage my family's finances too. Yet, I genuinely didn't mind. There was a profound, unadulterated joy that came from helping Rebecca achieve her dreams, a satisfaction that transcended any personal inconvenience. 3 years ago, when Rebecca first met James Wilson at an exclusive art gallery opening, an instant recognition sparked within me. They were perfect for each other. James hailed from an undeniably wealthy family, but he carried his affluence with a quiet humility, devoid of any ostentation. What truly impressed me was his profound appreciation for Rebecca's unique artistic perspective and his unwavering support for her burgeoning career ambitions. Their engagement after 2 years of dating surprised absolutely no one. And true to form, I was the very first person Rebecca called, her voice a joyous, ecstatic scream echoing through the phone. "Lisa, he proposed!" "You're going to be my maid of honor, right? I can't do this without you." Her voice bubbled with an almost tangible happiness that crisp December morning. "Of course I will," I promised, the words flowing effortlessly, even as my mind had already launched into a flurry of mental planning, strategizing how I could help transform her most cherished wedding dreams into a breathtaking reality. The initial planning stages were everything I had ever imagined, a blissful collaboration. Rebecca and I spent countless weekends immersed in the delightful chaos of browsing potential venues, meticulously discussing intricate color schemes, and curating extensive Pinterest boards overflowing with inspirational imagery. I took detailed, almost obsessive, notes during every single conversation, driven by an unshakable desire to ensure her unique vision became a tangible reality. My apartment, once a sanctuary of minimalist order, slowly began to fill with a joyful disarray of bridal magazines, an assortment of fabric swatches, and tear-outs of floral arrangements. The first ominous sign of trouble. A subtle tremor beneath the surface of our joyous planning emerged during what should have been a routine family dinner, convened specifically to discuss wedding budgets. Mom arrived, not with the collaborative spirit I'd hoped for, but with a leather-bound wedding planner I had never, ever seen before. "I've already put deposits down on the Clayton Hotel," she announced, her voice resonating with an almost triumphant air, before anyone had even had the chance to serve their salads. They only had one date available this summer, so I snatched it up. Rebecca, caught off guard, looked visibly surprised, yet simultaneously pleased by the unexpected gesture. "Mom, that's so generous," she began, a note of hesitant gratitude in her voice. But Lisa and I were still comparing venues. Mom swiftly cut her off, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "Darling, the Clayton book's up a year in advance. We're lucky they had a cancellation." She patted Rebecca's hand with an almost saccharine affection, while simultaneously shooting me a quick, triumphant glance that spoke volumes. "Besides," she added, her gaze sweeping the room, "I've always imagined your wedding there." That unilateral decision was merely the first in a cascading series of choices made, without any consultation whatsoever. Within weeks, Mom had essentially staged a subtle, yet undeniable, coup, transforming herself from an occasional, helpful participant to an undeniable wedding dictator. Venues and vendors I had painstakingly researched, chosen for their perfect alignment with Rebecca's aesthetic, were summarily dismissed in favor of her friends' fleeting recommendations. The delicate, nuanced color scheme Rebecca and I had painstakingly settled on was suddenly declared too drab, lacking the vibrant flair Mom felt was necessary. "It's fine," Rebecca assured me, her voice a little too quick, a little too dismissive, when I voiced my growing concern. "Mom's really enjoying this, and it makes planning easier. Plus, she and Dad are contributing a lot financially." I bit my tongue, the metallic taste of unspoken frustration rising in my mouth, and consciously stepped back, still offering assistance where I could, but feeling an increasing, unsettling sense of being an outsider looking in. That feeling of alienation intensified dramatically when my cousin Megan, a distant satellite in our family orbit, began appearing prominently in planning photos on social media. Megan had always hovered around our family events with a particular, almost desperate, interest in being part of the inner circle. Now, with Mom's subtle encouragement, she was suddenly accompanying Rebecca and Mom to vendor meetings to which I, the maid of honor, had not even been invited. In one particular Instagram photo, she was captured holding delicate color swatches against a rack of bridesmaid dress options, a task I had unequivocally understood would be mine, a privilege of my role. "Rebecca seems closer to Megan these days," I mentioned casually to my boyfriend Tyler one evening, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. as I scrolled through yet another photo of them, this time at an elaborate cake tasting. Maybe it's just because Megan has more free time. Tyler suggested, always the calm, steady voice of reason, pulling me back from the edge of my spiraling thoughts. You've been slammed at work this quarter. I nodded, attempting to push down the nagging worry that something far more significant and insidious was unfolding beneath the surface. After all, Rebecca and I had been each other's constants, an unwavering force for 30 years. A few weeks of wedding planning, no matter how chaotic, couldn't possibly change that, could it? But as spring relentlessly progressed, the once frequent invitations to planning events ceased coming altogether, a silence more deafening than any argument. When I called Rebecca to check in, her responses, once open and expansive, became increasingly vague, rushed, and evasive. The detailed, intimate discussions we once shared about intricate centerpieces and specific music selections were brusquely replaced with curt, dismissive quick texts, "Mom's handling it," or the even more unsettling, "Already figured it out." Meanwhile, despite my growing exclusion, I was still financially contributing to crucial elements of the wedding, my commitment unwavering even as my role diminished. I paid the substantial deposit for the photographer Rebecca loved, the one Mom had deemed too expensive. I painstakingly ordered custom welcome baskets, each detail carefully considered, for the out-of-town guests. And most significantly, I was secretly arranging what I hoped would be the ultimate, perfect wedding gift. A luxurious honeymoon to Bali, meticulously planned to include first-class flights and a private villa with breathtaking ocean views. I clung desperately to the belief that everything would miraculously return to normal after the wedding. This was just a stressful, temporary blip, I reasoned, and soon my sister and I would be laughing about Mom's overbearing wedding takeover, over a bottle of wine in her new, married apartment, the past 6 months a distant, amusing memory. I didn't realize then, in my naive optimism, how profoundly wrong I was, or how swiftly the situation would deteriorate beyond anything I ever thought possible, plunging into a depth of betrayal I couldn't yet fathom. The day I discovered I wasn't invited to Rebecca's wedding dress shopping was like a physical blow to the chest, a gut punch that stole my breath. I stumbled upon this devastating truth through an innocent, unsuspecting question from my co-worker, Natalie, who happened to be friends with the owner of the bridal boutique. "How was Rebecca's appointment yesterday?" Natalie asked, her voice light and conversational. "Sandra mentioned your sister found the one right away." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips, the steaming liquid suddenly tasting like ash. "What appointment?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely a whisper. Natalie's bright expression shifted, morphing from excited anticipation to palpable discomfort. "Oh, at elegant moments. Sandra said your mom, sister, and cousin had champagne and spent hours there. I just assumed you were there too." I mumbled something incoherent about a last-minute work emergency, my mind reeling, and then made my hasty escape to the sanctuary of the bathroom. There, I stared at my reflection, a stranger with wide, disbelieving eyes, and frantically tried to make sense of being excluded from such a profoundly important, intimately shared moment. Rebecca and I had talked about wedding dress shopping since we were teenagers, pretending pillowcases were flowing veils and making solemn promises to be there for each other's most special moments, especially this one. I called Rebecca that evening, my voice carefully controlled, deliberately devoid of the raw hurt churning within me. "How was dress shopping?" A palpable pause stretched across the line, heavy with unspoken things. "Oh," she finally said, her voice a little too light, a little too casual. "It just happened really fast. Mom had an appointment, and it wasn't supposed to be the actual shopping day, just a preliminary look." Another pause, pregnant with unspoken meaning. "With Megan," I prompted, the name tasting like ash on my tongue. "She was free, and we needed a third opinion. I could have made myself free, I said quietly, the words heavy with accusation. You could have asked, Lisa, don't make this a big deal, she replied, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. There will be plenty of other wedding stuff you can be part of. But the other wedding stuff never materialized. The bridal shower, an event typically orchestrated by the maid of honor, was organized entirely without my input, though. Predictably, I was asked to contribute financially to the lavish venue. The bachelorette party planning was swiftly and unequivocally taken over by Megan, who, with Mom's subtle encouragement, chose a destination I knew, with the intimate knowledge of a sister, Rebecca wouldn't truly enjoy. When I cautiously offered suggestions, based on 3 decades of knowing my sister's deepest desires and quiet preferences, they were summarily dismissed as not what Rebecca wants anymore. Still, despite the escalating slights, I continued to support from the shadows, a silent, unwavering presence. I finalized the intricate honeymoon arrangements, spending a breathtaking $8,600 on first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and a carefully curated selection of special experiences, a private cooking class, a sunset cruise, a guided trek to hidden waterfalls I knew the couple would absolutely adore. I meticulously imagined Rebecca's face, radiant with surprise. When I presented her with this extravagant gift at the rehearsal dinner, picturing the emotional hug, the shared tears, and the joyous return of our once unshakable sisterly bond. Meanwhile, the distance between us, once imperceptible, grew into an unbridgeable chasm. Rebecca began consistently declining our traditional Sunday brunches, always armed with a different, increasingly flimsy excuse. When we did manage to speak, our conversations felt stilted, scripted, and shallow, utterly devoid of the deep, soul-bearing talks we had always shared. Is everything okay between us? I finally asked directly, unable to bear the increasingly sporadic and superficial communication any longer. Everything's fine, she replied, her gaze not quite meeting mine, a telltale sign of evasion. I'm just super busy with wedding stuff. Megan's been amazing handling all the details. At a family gathering in May, a mere 2 months before the wedding, I overheard a conversation that sent a frigid wave of dread through my veins, making my blood run cold. I had stepped into the kitchen to refill my water glass, seeking a moment of respite from the stifling family pleasantries, when I distinctly heard my name mentioned from the adjacent dining room. Lisa's always been difficult. My mother's voice carried clearly, laced with a familiar, cutting dismissiveness. Rebecca's finally seeing it now. Always has to control everything, make everything about her accomplishments. Megan's voice, dripping with an almost saccharine, fake sympathy, responded, It must be hard for Rebecca, especially during her wedding when she should be the center of attention. Exactly. Mom affirmed, her tone one of vindicated satisfaction. That's why we've had to minimize her involvement. For Rebecca's sake. I stood frozen, the water overflowing my glass unheeded, as their cruel words slowly, meticulously, sank in. My own mother, the woman who was supposed to be my protector, was actively working to exclude me from my sister's wedding, systematically painting me as some sort of attention-seeking, manipulative monster to anyone who would listen. That night, the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. I dissolved into racking sobs in Tyler's arms, finally voicing the terrifying fears I'd been meticulously suppressing for months. What if they don't even want me at the wedding anymore? I choked out, tears streaming down my face. What if all this distancing is leading to something worse? Tyler pulled me close, his steady, unwavering presence a comforting contrast to my shaking hands. That's not possible, he said, his voice firm with conviction. You're Rebecca's sister, and you've done nothing but support her. But what if Mom has convinced her otherwise? I whispered, the insidious doubt gnawing at me. You don't know how persuasive she can be, how she twists things. Then you need to talk to Rebecca directly. Tyler said, his tone leaving no room for argument. No more guessing. No more hoping it will get better on its own. You need to have a real conversation about what's happening. He was right. The situation had deteriorated too far, become too toxic, for passive acceptance or wishful thinking. I texted Rebecca the next morning. My message concise, direct, and stripped of emotion. Need to talk about the wedding and our relationship. Can we meet tomorrow? Her response came hours later, terse and evasive. Really busy with wedding stuff. Come to Mom and Dad's on Thursday at 7. We can talk then. Those 5 days, stretching out before me like an endless desert, were among the longest of my life. I meticulously rehearsed what I would say, how I would calmly express my profound hurt without resorting to accusation or emotional outbursts. I reminded myself, repeatedly, that Rebecca might simply be caught in the middle, a pawn pressured by our mother's formidable, manipulative personality. I arrived at our parents' colonial-style home that Thursday evening, my heart a fragile vessel brimming with a desperate hope for reconciliation and a glimmer of clarity. I had no idea, no inkling whatsoever, that I was walking directly into an ambush, a meticulously orchestrated trap that would utterly shatter my relationship with my family and irrevocably force me to redefine what loyalty, truth, and self-respect truly meant. The evening air, heavy with unspoken tension, felt unusually still as I parked my car outside my parents' familiar colonial-style home that Thursday. The expansive, familiar driveway, where Rebecca and I had spent countless sun-drenched afternoons playing hopscotch as carefree children, now felt strangely alien, imbued with an unsettling foreignness. I checked my reflection in the rear view mirror, a fleeting glance at my strained face, smoothed my blouse, and took a deep, fortifying breath before heading to the front door. Mom answered before I could even ring the bell, as if she had been waiting just behind it, her expression utterly unreadable, a blank mask that betrayed no emotion. "We're in the living room," she said curtly, her voice devoid of warmth, turning abruptly without waiting for my response, her back to me. The scene inside felt meticulously staged, a tableau vivant of discomfort and calculated alliances. Dad sat in his usual armchair, sunk deep into its worn leather cushions, looking profoundly uncomfortable, his complexion a sickly, slightly gray pallor. Rebecca perched precariously on the very edge of the sofa, her eyes fixed downwards, her fingers twisting a loose thread in her lap with nervous energy, unable to meet my gaze. Mom positioned herself standing directly behind Rebecca, one hand possessively resting on the sofa back in what could only be interpreted as a protective, almost proprietorial stance. And there, in what had always unequivocally been my designated spot during family discussions, sat Megan, looking simultaneously smug, with a barely concealed smirk and feigning concern, her expression a carefully crafted facade. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing, a subtle defiance in my posture, when no one offered me a seat, the silence in the room pressing down on me. "Rebecca, I thought we were going to talk about the wedding." Mom interjected swiftly, cutting Rebecca off before she could even utter a sound, seizing control of the narrative. "That's why we're all here. There's something you need to understand about the wedding." A strange, unnerving stillness settled over me, a chilling calm that precedes a storm, a quiet certainty that something catastrophic was rapidly approaching. "We've been discussing things," Mom continued, her voice adopting the patronizing, dismissive tone she had perfected over decades of micromanaging and manipulating our family. "And we all agreed that your involvement in the wedding has become problematic." Problematic. I echoed, the word feeling hollow, meaningless in the face of the bizarre reality, my gaze fixed directly on Rebecca, who still stubbornly refused to meet my eyes, her complicit silence a knife twist. your controlling behavior, your need to make everything about yourself. Mom articulated, ticking off points on her fingers, as if enumerating items on a grocery list, her voice growing sharper with each accusation. The way you've tried to overshadow Rebecca's special time with your opinions and your financial contributions. I felt as though I'd stepped through a portal into an alternate, distorted reality, a world where up was down and black was white. Rebecca, I prompted, my voice desperate, pleading for my sister to speak for herself, to break free from Mom's suffocating control. She finally looked up, her expression a fragile mixture of guilt and a carefully rehearsed, fragile resolve. It's just been really stressful, Lisa. Every time you get involved, there's tension. Mom thinks. I repeated softly, my voice barely a whisper, a silent challenge. What do you think, Rebecca? Before she could answer, before she could even formulate a thought, Mom stepped forward, physically placing herself partially between us, a symbolic barrier. What Rebecca thinks is that her wedding should be a happy occasion, and frankly, your presence would make that impossible. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the very foundations of my reality shifting as her words registered, each one a hammer blow. My presence at the planning, you mean? I clarified, clinging to a desperate, fleeting hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Mom's lips curved into what can only be described as a smirk, a slow, malicious twist that bespoke pure, unadulterated satisfaction. A cruel gleam flickered in her eyes, finally delivering the blows she had meticulously orchestrated for months. We all agreed. You're not welcome at the wedding, she stated, enunciating each word with chilling precision, as if savoring a fine wine, drawing out the pain, not as maid of honor, not as a bridesmaid, not as a guest. It's better for everyone this way. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, punctuated only by the rhythmic, antique clock on the mantel, its steady ticking marking the seconds in a moment that stretched into an agonizing eternity. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his armchair, a faint rustle of fabric, but remained utterly silent, his characteristic avoidance of conflict winning out even now, in this pivotal, devastating moment. Megan, to her credit, had the fleeting decency to avert her gaze, staring intently at the floor. And Rebecca, my sister, my best friend since her very first breath, the confidante with whom I had shared every secret and every dream, sat in complicit, agonizing silence, effectively, irrevocably, ending 30 years of cherished sisterhood. I see, I said finally, the words surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor I expected. A testament to the shock that had settled deep within me. And when was this decision made? We've been moving this direction for months. Mom replied, clearly pleased by my calm, almost detached reaction, mistaking my profound shock for placid acceptance. Rebecca asked Megan to be her maid of honor weeks ago. We just needed to make it official. I turned to Megan, who now, emboldened by Mom's words, met my gaze with a challenging, almost defiant look. Congratulations, I said flatly, the word devoid of any genuine sentiment. It's nothing personal, she replied, the lie so transparent, so utterly flimsy. It was almost laughable. I couldn't help but let out a small, bitter laugh, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. Nothing personal about replacing me in my sister's wedding, in my sister's life. Rebecca. I tried one more time, my voice a desperate plea, a final, fragile attempt to connect, to break through the wall of her silence. Is this really what you want? Mom answered again, her voice sharp, dismissive, reinforcing her control. Rebecca wants a drama-free wedding. You've always been too controlling, too opinionated. Everything has to be your way. The venue wasn't good enough. The caterer wasn't up to your standards. That's not true. And you know it? I interrupted, the first crack in my carefully composed facade finally showing, a tremor of fury breaking through. I've supported every decision, even when I wasn't consulted. I've contributed thousands of dollars without being asked. See, there it is. Mom pointed accusingly, her finger jabbing the air, a theatrical gesture of condemnation. Throwing your money in our faces. Using your financial contributions to control the wedding. That's exactly why you can't be there. I looked at my father, silently pleading, my gaze imploring him to say something, anything, to break his ingrained pattern of silence. He met my eyes briefly, his own filled with a fleeting flicker of regret, then looked away, his lifelong pattern of avoiding conflict, winning out even now, in this moment of profound injustice. A strange, almost otherworldly calm settled over me then, a sudden, blinding clarity cutting through the suffocating layers of hurt and confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a heartfelt, honest conversation. This was a carefully orchestrated exclusion, a methodical, calculated campaign, months in the making. Good to know, I said simply, the words precise, chillingly devoid of emotion. I turned and walked toward the door, my movements mechanical, deliberate, each step a conscious effort. Behind me, I heard Rebecca call my name once, softly, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, but no footsteps followed. No one tried to stop me. The drive home passed in a disorienting blur, streetlights smearing like watercolors through the unexpected, stinging tears that filled my eyes. I pulled over twice, the road ahead becoming too blurry, too dangerous to navigate safely. My phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming texts and calls, a relentless assault of notifications. But I couldn't bring myself to look at them, couldn't bear to face the unknown contents. When I finally reached the familiar sanctuary of my apartment, Tyler was waiting, his face alight with a hopeful expectation that crumbled instantly the moment he saw my tear-streaked face and disheveled appearance. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with immediate concern, pulling me into a warm, grounding hug. The whole devastating story poured out in disjointed fragments between racking sobs, the ambush, Mom's cruel, triumphant smirk, Rebecca's chilling betrayal, Dad's deafening silence, Megan's barely concealed triumph. "They can't do this," Tyler said when I finally finished, his voice raw with outrage, an echo of my own disbelief. "You're her sister. You've done nothing but support her." "Apparently that doesn't matter," I whispered, the emotional exhaustion beginning to set in, a heavy cloak settling over me. "Mom's been working on this for months, turning Rebecca against me, making me out to be some kind of villain." "What are you going to do?" Tyler asked, his hand warm and comforting against mine. I stared out the window at the glittering city lights below, feeling hollowed out, yet paradoxically, somehow lighter, as if the absolute worst had happened, and now finally, I could begin to rebuild. "I don't know yet," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "But I know I deserve better than this. All of this." What I didn't realize then was that the brutal confrontation that evening wasn't the end of the story, merely a devastating setup for the profound betrayals and the unexpected, winding path to healing that would relentlessly follow in the coming days and weeks. Sleep eluded me that night, a cruel phantom. I lay awake in the silent darkness, replaying the scene at my parents' house with agonizing clarity, meticulously dissecting every word, every fleeting look, desperately searching for something I might have misunderstood or misinterpreted. But the vivid memory of my mother's satisfied smirk as she delivered her devastating verdict left no room for ambiguity, no crack for doubt to creep in. By 4 a.m. I had given up on sleep entirely. I rose a zombie-like figure and sat at my kitchen table, a half-empty cup of tea growing cold beside me. I began to methodically catalog every single contribution I had made to Rebecca's wedding, a grim ledger of my misplaced generosity. The photographer deposit, a substantial $2,500, a series of custom welcome baskets for out-of-town guests totaling $800, The elegant string quartet I'd arranged as a heartfelt surprise for the ceremony, an additional 2,200. The list grew longer as I meticulously recalled smaller, yet significant, expenses. The exquisite vintage hairpin. I'd found that perfectly matched Rebecca's grandmother's earrings. The calligrapher I'd hired for the intricate place cards. After Rebecca had casually mentioned her love for hand lettering. And then, the piece de resistance, the crown jewel of my gifts to my sister and James the honeymoon. First, class flights to Bali, a staggering 4,200. The private villa with breathtaking ocean views, 3,800. The special, personalized experiences I'd meticulously arranged, a private cooking class, a romantic sunset cruise, a guided trek to hidden waterfalls, an additional 600. All told, by the time the first light of dawn was breaking, I had contributed a staggering sum of over for 15,000 to a wedding from which I was now definitively banned from attending. The first faint light of dawn was just beginning to streak across the horizon when I made my decision, a cold, hard resolve settling in my heart. I opened my laptop, my fingers steady despite the turmoil within, and navigated to my banking app. With deliberate precision, I transferred the entire 8,600 honeymoon fund back to my personal savings account. Next, I logged into the airline and resort websites, methodically canceling each reservation, a grim satisfaction accompanying each click. I sent a brief, professional email to the travel agent handling the special experiences, explaining, with an almost chilling detachment, that the plans had changed. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the night, a relentless chorus of incoming texts and calls, but I hadn't dared to look at it. Now, with my immediate financial actions complete, I finally checked the notifications. 3 missed calls from Rebecca, a jarring 12 from Mom, and even 1 from Dad, which was so unusual it sent a fresh ripple of unease through me. There were multiple texts, most from Mom, ranging from defensively accusatory, "You're making this all about you again," to outright hostile, "After everything we've done for you." None, not a single one, indicated remorse or reconsideration. I made one last, decisive call to my credit card company. "I need to report some unauthorized charges," I explained to the representative, my voice calm and steady. "Family members have been making purchases without my permission." It wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely untrue either. I had never explicitly authorized my mother to use my card information for the additional, exorbitantly priced wedding favors she'd ordered last month, or for the upgraded, unnecessary linens she'd insisted upon. By 7 a.m., I had methodically untangled every single one of my financial ties to Rebecca's wedding. I sent a brief email to my boss explaining I needed a personal day, then, with a profound sense of finality, turned off my phone completely. The sudden, profound silence felt both terrifying and liberating. I spent the morning walking aimlessly through the serene public gardens, attempting to process the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. The betrayal felt physical, a tangible, aching void beneath my ribs that intensified with each shallow breath. Rebecca and I had shared everything for 30 years. Secrets, dreams, sorrows, celebrations. How could she sit silently while Mom banished me from her wedding? How could she replace me with Megan, of all people? Around noon, I finally met my best friend Olivia for lunch. I hadn't planned to tell her everything, the raw wound still too fresh. But one look at my face and she knew something was catastrophically wrong. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I finished explaining, her voice loud enough that neighboring tables turned to look. "Your own mother said that to your face." And Rebecca just sat there, said nothing. Olivia's genuine outrage was incredibly validating after hours of corrosive self-doubt. She tried to speak once or twice. I trailed off, the hurt still too raw to articulate fully, but Mom kept interrupting, and she didn't stop any of it. Olivia reached for my hand across the table, her grip firm and comforting. "Lisa, there's something you should know. I didn't tell you before, because I didn't want to upset you, but now I think you need to hear it." My stomach tightened with a cold dread. "What is it?" "Your mom has been saying things about you for months now," Olivia began, her gaze uncomfortable. "At Rebecca's engagement party. She told my mother that you were jealous of Rebecca's happiness. And at the Williams' dinner party last month, she mentioned how concerned everyone was about your fragile emotional state and how the family was walking on eggshells around you." I stared at her, stunned, my mind reeling. "What? Why would she say that?" "I don't know, but she's been planting these little seeds with everyone in your social circle. Small comments, concerned looks, nothing direct enough to seem malicious, just enough to create this impression that you're unstable, somehow difficult." Olivia squeezed my hand again. I shut it down whenever I heard it, but I'm not everywhere. My mother's cruel voice echoed in my memory. Your controlling behavior. Your need to make everything about yourself. She hadn't just been turning Rebecca against me. She'd been systematically undermining me with everyone we knew, poisoning my reputation, twisting perceptions. "But why?" I whispered, more to myself than to Olivia. "What does she gain from this?" "Control," Olivia said simply, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "You're successful, independent, financially stable. You have what she never did. My mom always said your mother seemed jealous of you, even when we were kids." The fragmented pieces of my past began to align in a chilling new pattern, illuminating decades of small cruelties, subtle slights, and insidious manipulations I had normalized or excused. The times Mom had forgotten to tell me about important family events. The backhanded compliments about my career. "It's amazing you've done so well without a husband to support you." The way she subtly reminded Rebecca of every childhood slight, while glossing over all I'd done to support and protect my sister. "I've been so blind," I said finally, the realization a bitter taste in my mouth. "You've been a daughter who wanted to believe the best about her mother," Olivia corrected gently, her voice full of empathy. "That's not blindness. That's love." By the time I returned home that afternoon, a profound shift had occurred within me. I still felt deeply hurt, the raw wound of betrayal still throbbing. But there was a newfound clarity, a sharp focus on what was truly happening and what I unequivocally needed to do. I turned my phone back on and watched, almost detachedly, as notifications flooded in, a digital avalanche. 28 missed calls in total, voicemails ranging from my mother's cold, cutting fury to my father's uncomfortable, hesitant attempts at peacemaking, and then one message, sent at 3:42 a.m. from Rebecca, a text that changed everything. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. Mom's been lying to me about you for months. James and I just found out what she did with the honeymoon reservations. Please call me. Please. I'm so sorry." I stared at Rebecca's message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the call button without pressing it, a torrent of conflicting emotions swirling within me. The raw emotion in her text felt genuinely remorseful. But after months of insidious manipulation and yesterday's brutal confrontation, I wasn't ready to dive back into the chaos without understanding more, without firm assurances. The other messages painted a chaotic picture of family implosion. James' voicemails evolved rapidly, beginning with righteously indignant outrage. "How dare you cancel the honeymoon after promising it as a gift?" To thinly veiled threats. "Yes, but to tell everyone about your behavior. Convincing attempt at reconciliation. We can still fix this where few apologize, where fewer and far mores." Dad's messages were fewer and far more subdued. "Your mother is very upset," he said in one, background noise suggesting he was calling from his car to avoid being overheard. "I didn't know about any of this until yesterday. Please call when you can." Other family members had begun weighing in too. My Uncle Robert, always Mom's steadfast ally, left a stern, lecturing voicemail about respecting your parents. My grandmother, Martha, asked in her wavering, frail voice if I was feeling all right, clearly having received Mom's distorted version of events. But there were unexpected supporters, too. Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, who rarely involved herself in family drama, left a surprisingly forceful message. "I've watched your mother do this before, Lisa. She did the same to me with your father. Call me, we need to talk." I decided to start there, calling my father's sister back first. "Oh, Lisa." Aunt Catherine's warm, familiar voice filled the line immediately, a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "I've been so worried. Are you all right?" "Not really," I admitted, my voice catching. "I don't understand. What's happening, Aunt Catherine?" "Why would Mom do this?" "Because you threaten her," she said simply, her voice matter of fact. "You always have, since you were little. So capable, so independent, so sure of yourself. Deborah needs to be needed to control everything. When that's challenged, she reacts. But turning my sister against me, by banning me from the wedding, I asked, incredulous. "It's what she does." Aunt Catherine sighed, a deep, wary sound. "She did the same to me when I was your age. Your father and I were always close. But when he met Deborah, things changed. She created conflicts that didn't exist, told your father I'd said terrible things about her. By their wedding, I wasn't welcome either." I sat down heavily, processing this staggering revelation, a missing piece of a decades-old puzzle finally falling into place. Dad never told me that. Thomas has always chosen peace over confrontation, especially with your mother. We eventually reconciled, but only years later, and never like before. Her voice softened. "But this isn't about old history. This is about stopping the pattern now, before your relationship with Rebecca is permanently damaged." After speaking with Catherine, I called my best friend from college, Andrea, who now worked as a therapist. Without breaking client confidentiality, she helped me understand the insidious psychological dynamics at play. Narcissistic patterns, triangulation, the golden child scapegoat dynamic that had subtly shaped my relationship with Rebecca since childhood. The most important thing, Andrea emphasized, her voice calm and authoritative, is protecting your own boundaries while leaving room for Rebecca to find her way back. She's been manipulated too, remember. I was still processing this complex advice when my phone rang again. It was James, Rebecca's fiancé, Lisa. He sounded genuinely distressed, his voice laced with relief. "Thank God you answered. It's been chaos here. Rebecca's been crying for hours." "What happened, James?" I kept my voice neutral, careful, not yet ready to extend full trust. "We found out what your mother's been doing. The lies she's been telling, the emails she altered." His voice trembled with a controlled fury. "Lisa, Rebecca never knew you were excluded from dress shopping. Your mom told her you couldn't make it, showed her texts from you canceling." "What?" I interjected, my mind reeling. "I never sent any texts. We know that now?" James confirmed grimly. "Your mother apparently created fake conversations to show Rebecca, making it look like you were too busy or didn't care about wedding activities." His voice hardened. When we confronted her, she admitted to changing the names in the contact list on Rebecca's phone, too. Rerouting some of your texts to her own phone. The level of deliberate, calculated manipulation was staggering, almost unbelievable. "But yesterday at the house," James continued, his voice softening with regret, "Rebecca thought that meeting was to reconcile things. Your mother told her you'd been saying horrible things about the wedding, that you needed to hear how hurt everyone was. She never expected what actually happened." My head was spinning, overwhelmed by the depth of deceit. "Why is she telling me this through you? Why won't Rebecca call me herself?" "Because she's terrified you'll never speak to her again," James admitted. "And because," he hesitated, the gravity of his next words palpable, "your mother showed up at our apartment last night after you left. She was not well, screaming about ungrateful children, demanding we choose sides. It got bad enough that neighbors called building security." The situation was spiraling faster than I could process, a whirlwind of emotional chaos. I need to think, James. This is all too much. I understand. Just don't shut the door completely, okay? Rebecca loves you. She's been manipulated too. I promised nothing but said I'd be in touch soon. I barely had time to absorb the implications of this conversation before my work phone rang. It was Sandra, our office receptionist. Lisa. Her voice was hushed, filled with a palpable sense of urgency. I hate to bother you on your day off, but there's a situation here. Your mother arrived about 20 minutes ago demanding to see you. When I explained you weren't in, she's causing quite a scene in the lobby. My professional and personal worlds were colliding in the most spectacular, worst possible way. What is she doing exactly? I asked, my voice tight with dread. Making accusations. Telling anyone who'll listen that you've stolen money from her. That you're experiencing some kind of breakdown. Sandra lowered her voice conspiratorially. Mr. Daniels is trying to handle it, but she's becoming increasingly erratic. I'll be right there, I said, grabbing my keys, my hands shaking. The 15-minute drive to my office felt like entering a battle zone. Mom had never visited my workplace before, had shown minimal interest in my career beyond how it financially benefited the family. Now she was there, deliberately targeting the professional reputation I'd spent years meticulously building. I arrived to find two stern-faced security guards escorting my mother from the building, her shrill voice carrying across the hushed lobby. You don't know what she's capable of. She's always been troubled. The embarrassment was acute, a burning blush that spread across my face as numerous colleagues, curiosity etched on their faces, watched the scene unfold. Mr. Daniels, my direct supervisor, approached me with a look of genuine concern. Lisa, take whatever time you need to handle this personal matter, he said quietly, his voice a steady reassurance. Your work speaks for itself. No one here is paying attention to unfounded accusations. His support should have been comforting, but the public spectacle, the utter violation of my professional space, left me feeling exposed, vulnerable, and deeply violated. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. Mom was actively, maliciously trying to destroy the very foundations of my life, my reputation, my relationships, my career. As security guided my mother towards the parking lot, her eyes locked with mine across the lobby. Instead of the remorse or shame one might expect from such a public display, I saw only cold, cutting fury, and something worse, a chilling satisfaction at having disrupted my carefully ordered world. In that precise moment, something fundamental shifted within me. The hurt, approval-seeking child that had lingered within me for decades disappeared, replaced by a clear-eyed, resolute adult who could finally see the pervasive pattern of manipulation for what it truly was. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was abuse. And it had gone on long enough. I returned to my apartment, the silence echoing after the day's chaos, and made a firm, unequivocal decision. It was time to address this situation once and for all. Not with emotional reactions, not with tearful pleas, but with calm, irrefutable truth, and unshakable resolve. I would meet with Rebecca and anyone else involved to lay out exactly what had happened, to expose the insidious lies, and to establish boundaries that would protect my well-being going forward. Whether those boundaries included attending the wedding or even maintaining contact with my mother remained to be seen. But for the very first time, I understood that I deserved better treatment than I'd received, and I was prepared to demand it regardless of the consequences. 2 days later, I sat at a corner table in a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between my apartment and Rebecca's. I'd arrived early to settle my nerves, which were still humming with a nervous energy, arranging the printed evidence meticulously in a neat folder beside me. Screenshots of original texts that directly contradicted Mom's fabricated ones, email confirmations of wedding arrangements I'd painstakingly made, Bank statements clearly showing my substantial financial contributions. Rebecca arrived alone, looking smaller somehow. Her usual vibrant confidence diminished, almost fragile. Dark circles beneath her eyes mirrored my own exhaustion. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, as she slid into the chair opposite me. "James isn't joining us?" I asked, having expected him after our phone conversation. "He's parking the car," she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her purse beside her. "I wanted a few minutes with just you first." "Lisa, I don't even know where to begin." I waited, giving her the space she desperately needed to find her words. This wasn't how I'd pictured our first conversation, after the devastating confrontation, but nothing about this situation had followed expected patterns. I believed her. Rebecca finally said, her voice breaking, tears welling in her eyes. "All these months, Mom has been showing me texts from you, canceling plans, telling me you thought my wedding choices were tacky, that you were too busy with your important career to be bothered with wedding details." Tears spilled onto her cheeks, tracing clear paths through the smudged makeup. I believed her, because it was easier than thinking my own mother would lie so completely, so deliberately. "She showed you fake texts?" I asked, still struggling to comprehend the monstrous extent of the deception. Rebecca nodded, pulling out her phone, her hand still trembling. "James figured it out. Look at this." She showed me her messaging app, scrolling through what appeared to be conversations with me. Except they weren't my words at all. Messages dismissing wedding plans, complaining about costs, making snide remarks about her choices. All attributed to my number, but written in a voice nothing like mine. "Mom had access to my phone," Rebecca explained, her voice raw with shame. "She created a contact with her number but your name. When I thought I was texting you, I was actually texting her. Then she'd respond pretending to be you." Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And she deleted real messages from you. I never received half the things you sent me." The methodical, calculated nature of the deception was staggering, almost physically sickening. "But what about when we saw each other in person?" I pressed, a new wave of hurt washing over me. "Surely, you could tell something was off." "We barely saw each other these past few months," Rebecca explained, her voice heavy with regret. "Mom always had an excuse for why you couldn't make it to wedding events. And when we did meet, she was always there, controlling the conversation, interpreting everything you said in the worst possible light afterward." Rebecca looked up as James approached the table, carrying 3 coffees. She poisoned everything. James set down the coffees before taking a seat beside Rebecca, his expression somber. "Lisa, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening sooner." "How did you figure it out?" I asked, directing the question to James. "The honeymoon cancellation was the tipping point," James explained, his voice firm. "When Rebecca got the notification, she was completely confused, because she didn't even know about the Bali trip. Your mother claimed you had promised this elaborate honeymoon, but canceled it vindictively after being rightly excluded from the wedding." "But that made no sense," Rebecca interjected, her voice filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "Why would you spend thousands on a honeymoon for us if you were as resentful as Mom claimed?" "So we started investigating," James continued, his gaze direct, checking her phone records, comparing timestamps of messages. "Once we started looking for inconsistencies, the whole fabrication fell apart. The final proof came when we found a hidden folder on your mother's tablet," Rebecca added, her voice a horrified whisper. She'd actually been keeping screenshots of fake conversations she created, probably to keep her stories straight. I pushed my own folder across the table, the weight of the evidence of physical presence. "I brought my own evidence," I said, my voice steady. Bank transfers, original emails, everything. As Rebecca and James reviewed the documents, their expressions shifted from initial shock to dawning horror, and finally to righteous indignation. The stark contrast between my actual words and actions versus what my mother had portrayed couldn't have been more devastatingly clear. That day, at your parents' house, James said, his voice quiet, Rebecca thought we were meeting to clear the air about miscommunications. She had no idea your mother was planning to ban you from the wedding. Rebecca nodded, shame evident in her downcast eyes. When Mom started saying those terrible things, claiming we'd all agreed, I was in shock. By the time I processed what was happening, you were already gone. Her hand, still trembling slightly, reached for mine across the table. Lisa, I never agreed to exclude you from my wedding. Never. You're my sister, my best friend. I can't get married without you there. The validation of my experience, the unequivocal confirmation that I wasn't crazy, brought a rush of raw emotion I hadn't expected, a cleansing wave of tears. For months, I'd been gaslit, manipulated into questioning my own perceptions, my own worth within my own family. We need to talk about Mom, I said, once I could trust my voice again, the words clear and firm. This isn't normal behavior. This is deliberate, calculated manipulation. It gets worse, James said grimly. After you left that night, Rebecca confronted your mother. The things she said, the venom, it was like watching someone transform into a different person. Rebecca nodded, her face pale. She admitted to everything, but with no remorse. She said she was protecting me from your negative influence. When I said I wanted you back in the wedding, she threatened to withdraw all financial support and tell everyone in the family I was having a pre-wedding breakdown. Just like what she's been saying about me. I murmured, the pattern chillingly clear. Exactly, James confirmed. It's a pattern she uses to discredit anyone who challenges her. We spent the next hour meticulously mapping out the full, horrific extent of my mother's manipulation, the altered texts, the diverted invitations, the insidious rumors spread throughout our social circle, the absolute financial control she had wielded. Each revelation built upon the last, creating a comprehensive, undeniable picture of calculated emotional abuse spanning decades. I've arranged a meeting, I finally said, taking a deep breath, with Dad, Aunt Catherine, and a few other family members who need to hear the truth. A neutral family intervention of sorts. When? Rebecca asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. Tomorrow evening. Will you come? She nodded without hesitation, her resolve clear. Of course. It's time everyone knew the truth. The family meeting the following evening was both difficult and profoundly necessary. We gathered in Aunt Catherine's spacious, comforting living room myself, Rebecca and James, Dad, Aunt Catherine and Uncle Paul, and our maternal grandmother, Martha, who had specifically asked to be included after receiving concerning, tearful calls from Mom. I presented the evidence methodically, without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves, the fake texts, the meticulously documented financial records, the witness accounts of Mom's erratic public behaviors. Catherine shared strikingly similar experiences from decades earlier, detailing Mom's past manipulations and exclusions. James described Mom's terrifying meltdown at their apartment, his voice low and serious. Dad sat silent throughout most of the presentation, his face growing increasingly pale and gray as the damning evidence mounted. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, thick with regret. I knew some of it, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the floor. Not the extent, but enough that I should have done something long ago. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing regret. I chose peace over protecting you. I'm so sorry, Lisa. Mom arrived last, having been deceptively told this was merely a wedding budget discussion. Her confident, almost theatrical entrance faltered dramatically when she saw the assembled group, their faces grim, and the irrefutable evidence spread across the coffee table like a silent accusation. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes darting frantically between faces, a flicker of panic in their depths. "A chance for truth," I said simply, my voice calm and unwavering. What followed was both predictable and agonizingly painful. Initial denial, a vehement refusal to accept any wrongdoing. Wild accusations of conspiracy against her, a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Then, attempts to win allies through familiar, manipulative tactics, feigned vulnerability, and tearful pleas for understanding. When those failed, rage erupted, first cold and cutting, then hot and uncontrolled, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. And finally, when thoroughly cornered by irrefutable evidence and the silent condemnation of the family, tears, dramatic and self-pitying, and claims of misunderstanding, of only wanting what was best for the family. "I will not be treated this way," she declared, her voice trembling with indignation, when everyone remained unmoved by her performance, their faces unyielding. "After everything I've done for this family, for Rebecca's wedding." About the wedding, Rebecca interrupted, standing to face our mother directly, her own voice remarkably firm, devoid of its usual hesitation. "Lisa will be my maid of honor, as I always wanted. If you can't accept that and behave respectfully toward her, then you will have a severely limited role in both the wedding and our lives going forward." Mom's face contorted with shock, a grotesque mask of disbelief. "You would choose her over your own mother." "I'm choosing truth over manipulation," Rebecca replied steadily, her voice unwavering. "I'm choosing health over toxicity." "Your father will never allow this." Mom turned to Dad, expectation clear in her expression. A lifetime of unchallenged control in her gaze. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Dad didn't yield to keep the peace. "Deborah, enough," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, resonating with a newfound authority. "Look at what you've done. Look at the evidence. This stops now." The intervention didn't end with a neat, Hollywood-esque resolution. Mom left in a furious, self-righteous rage, promising dire consequences for our betrayal. But something fundamental had shifted. The insidious pattern of manipulation had been exposed, named and, most importantly, rejected by those it was designed to control. As difficult family members and complex wedding dynamics go, we were far from the finish line. But for the very first time, I felt we were all walking in the same direction, toward truth, toward healthier relationships, regardless of what that might mean for the wedding. Now just weeks away. The week before Rebecca's wedding arrived with a tentative, fragile new normal establishing itself within our fractured family. After the intense intervention, Mom had cycled through her familiar repertoire of manipulative tactics, icy silence, tearful pleas for understanding, rage-filled accusations, and finally, a grudging, outward acceptance of the new, firm boundaries we'd painstakingly established. Dad, to everyone's profound surprise, had continued to stand firm in his unwavering support of Rebecca's decision to reinstate me as maid of honor. After decades of choosing peace over any form of confrontation, he seemed to have finally found a reserve of strength none of us knew he possessed. "I should have protected you both long ago," he told me during a private, heartfelt conversation on my apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like scattered diamonds. I convinced myself that saying nothing was the same as keeping the peace. I was wrong. "Why now, Dad?" I asked gently, my voice barely a whisper. "What changed?" He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment, lost in thought. Seeing it all laid out like that, the deliberate nature of it, I couldn't hide from it anymore. "And honestly, Lisa, I'm tired. Tired of walking on eggshells. Tired of pretending everything is fine when it isn't." His vulnerability was both shocking and deeply healing. This new version of my father, willing to acknowledge hard truths, to apologize, to change, gave me a profound hope that genuine transformation, however slow, might truly be possible. Rebecca and I had been painstakingly rebuilding our relationship day by day, hour by hour. Our bond, though bruised and scarred by the recent betrayals, was not broken. We'd spent long hours, talking through the intricate web of manipulations that had driven us apart, grieving the months of sisterhood we'd lost to deceit. I keep thinking about what would have happened if James hadn't discovered those fake texts. She said during one of our reconciliation brunches, now happily restored to their rightful place in our weekly routines. Let's not think about that, I suggested, squeezing her hand across the table, my voice firm. We're here now, and that's what matters. As for Mom, the family had presented her with clear, non-negotiable conditions. She could participate in the wedding, but her role would be significantly restricted. No more unilateral decisions, no private conversations with vendors designed to undermine, no attempts to isolate or manipulate any family members. And if I refused these conditions, she'd asked, the word dripping with disdain, a challenge in her eyes. Then you'll attend as a guest only, with no input on any elements of the ceremony or reception. Rebecca had stated firmly, her voice steady and resolute, to everyone's surprise. Mom had eventually agreed, though her compliance seemed more strategic than genuinely repentant. The fleeting flashes of resentment in her eyes, quickly masked by an artificial pleasantness, told the true story of her begrudging acceptance. My own journey through this ordeal had been transformative in unexpected ways. The initial, devastating heartbreak had gradually given way to a profound clarity about family dynamics I'd normalized for far too long. Working with a therapist specializing in family trauma, I'd begun to recognize insidious patterns of enabling and people-pleasing in my own behavior that had made me vulnerable to manipulation. Your worth isn't measured by what you provide to others, Dr. Marshall reminded me during a particularly difficult session. Not financially, not emotionally, not practically. These words became a powerful mantra as wedding preparations entered their final, feverish phase. I reinstated my role as maid of honor with a newfound sense of boundaries. Yes, I would help coordinate the bridesmaids and assist Rebecca with last-minute details. No, I would not deplete my savings or sacrifice my emotional well-being to manage everyone else's emotions or fulfill their unreasonable demands. I'd also rebooked a modified version of the honeymoon package for Rebecca and James, still generous, but now scaled to reflect my new, healthier understanding of giving. This is a gift freely given, with no strings attached, I told them when presenting the revised itinerary, not a payment for inclusion or affection. The wedding day itself arrived sunny and clear, a beautiful, almost ironic contrast to the emotional storms of the previous months. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. at the Clayton Hotel, leaving the morning and early afternoon for a flurry of preparations. Mom, remarkably, maintained her promised behavior, though the effort visibly strained her. Her interactions with me were minimal but outwardly polite. Her attention focused on playing the role of mother of the bride perfectly for the gathering guests. As I helped Rebecca into her wedding dress, the one I hadn't been present to see her choose, I felt a momentary, bittersweet pang of loss for the uncomplicated joy this day should have held, untainted by the recent turmoil. Rebecca caught my expression in the mirror, her eyes meeting mine. "I wish we could erase the last few months," she said softly, her voice filled with wistful regret. "I don't," I surprised myself by responding, the words flowing instinctively. As painful as it was, it brought truth into the open. "We can build something healthier now." She turned to face me, radiant in ivory lace, her eyes shining. "When did my big sister get so wise?" "Probably around the time my little sister got so brave," I replied, carefully adjusting her veil, a quiet smile on my lips. The ceremony proceeded beautifully, a testament to months of collaborative effort, and a triumph over adversity. I stood proudly beside Rebecca, holding her magnificent bouquet, as she and James exchanged vows full of authentic emotion, their voices clear and resonant. Mom sat in the front row beside Dad, her composure perfect, her gaze occasionally meeting mine, with an unreadable mix of emotions. It was during the reception that the most unexpected, and perhaps most profound, moment of healing occurred. As guests mingled during cocktail hour, I found myself momentarily alone near the gift table, idly adjusting some displaced cards. The calligraphy is beautiful. Mom's voice came from behind me, soft and hesitant, almost a whisper. That was your doing, wasn't it? I turned, bracing myself for a veiled criticism disguised as a compliment. But her expression held something I rarely, if ever, saw directed at me: genuine appreciation, a quiet acknowledgement of my effort. Yes, I answered simply. Rebecca mentioned loving hand lettering, so, Mom nodded, a long, uncomfortable silence stretching between us, heavy with unspoken sentiments. Finally, she spoke again, her voice lower, less certain, a tremor of vulnerability in her tone. You've always noticed those details about people, what they love, what matters to them. I never had that gift. The admission, so small yet so significant coming from her, left me momentarily speechless. The therapist Catherine recommended. Mom continued, looking anywhere but at me, her gaze fixed on a distant point. Says I need to practice acknowledging others, strengths without feeling diminished by them. A brief, humorless laugh escaped her lips. Apparently, I have work to do in that area. You're seeing a therapist. I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice, the raw astonishment. Your father insisted. After everything. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders, a hint of her old defiance returning. I don't expect this to fix things between us. I know that will take time, if it's even possible. But I am trying. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a miraculous transformation. But it was a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the formidable fortress of denial she'd built around herself. And for today, in this moment, that was more than enough. 1 month after the wedding, our family began tentative group therapy sessions. Mom attended reluctantly at first, her resistance palpable, then with increasing, albeit still cautious, willingness as the structured framework gave her acceptable ways to express her needs without resorting to manipulation. Dad, remarkably, found his voice gradually, speaking truths long suppressed, his quiet strength emerging. Rebecca and I strengthened our sisterhood, now built on a foundation of mutual respect, empathy, and unwavering honesty, rather than old, codependent patterns. My own healing journey continued independently as well. I established clearer, firmer boundaries in all my relationships, not just with family. I learned to recognize when my inherent desire to help veered into unhealthy territory, becoming a burden rather than a source of joy. And most importantly, I began to value myself apart from what I could provide or do for others, realizing my intrinsic worth. Tyler had been my unwavering rock throughout the entire ordeal, his steadfast support never faltering, his love a constant, anchoring presence. 6 months after Rebecca's wedding, during a weekend hike to our favorite mountain overlook, surrounded by the crisp autumn air and breathtaking views, he proposed. Yes, I said without hesitation, my heart soaring, but with one condition. He raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk on his face, waiting. Our wedding planning stays between us. Small committee, clear boundaries, no drama. His laughter echoed across the valley below us, a joyous sound. Deal. Life continued to evolve in the years that followed. Mom's progress came in fits and starts, some days showing genuine growth and self-awareness, others falling back into old, ingrained patterns of control. Dad discovered a newfound confidence that revitalized not just his marriage, but his long-deferred personal interests, pursuing hobbies he'd put on hold for decades. Rebecca and James welcomed their first child, making me an aunt to a beautiful little girl whose middle name, Lisa, brought tears to my eyes, a profound symbol of our mended bond. And I learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, that boundaries aren't barriers to love but rather solid, essential foundations for its healthiest, most authentic expression, and that standing firm in your own worth is not selfish, but profoundly necessary for your well-being. The journey from that devastating night, when my mother uttered those cruel, indelible words, "We all agreed you're not welcome at the wedding," to where I stand now wasn't direct or easy. It required immense courage to face painful truths, the wisdom to distinguish healthy relationships from toxic ones, and the unwavering strength to demand the respect I deserved. If you're facing similar family challenges or painful exclusions, remember that sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the very ones that ultimately lead to the deepest, most profound healing. Your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it, and sometimes, when the door to reconciliation seems firmly, irrevocably closed, it's actually the first, necessary step toward opening a healthier one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to stand up to family manipulation or set difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you find the courage to value yourself when others couldn't see or acknowledge your worth? Drop a comment below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Your support means everything as we navigate these complicated human experiences together. Thank you for listening, and remember, your story matters too.